YPN is when the industry professionals share their stories, career experiences, and advice with our audience. Tonight's program is made possible by support from Young One Sun Foundation. I'm Jo, Senior Director of Arts and Culture here at the Korea Society. And it is so great to see so many of you here in our event space in New York. And a very special thanks to our audience who's joining us tonight online, as this program is also simultaneously live webcasted on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, like our YouTube channel. And tonight, we are thrilled to welcome to YPN food writer Eric Kim.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
So Eric is known for sharing recipes accompanied with thoughtful storytelling and reflection. And his writings and contents have appeared in various food media, including, but not exclusively, Food Network, Saveur, and Food 52, where he amassed a devoted readership for his column, Table for One. Currently, Eric is a staff writer at the New York Times, and next spring, he will release his highly anticipated debut cookbook, Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home. So, welcome to the Korea Society, Eric. It's so great to have you.
Thank you for having me. This is very cool and interesting. It's been a very long time since I've done a live in-person event. So thank you all for coming. It's really cool.
A quick reminder, you will have a chance to ask your own questions to Eric later in this hour. And if you're joining us online, you can send your questions to, you can email artsandculture@koreasociety.org or tweet at Korea Society Art. So, Eric, let's start with your origin story. I understand that you were born in Atlanta, Georgia, and your parents were from Korea. They were recent immigrants. So, what was it like for you to grow up in the South as son of recent immigrants from Korea?
Yeah. I love that I get to talk about the very beginning because usually it's always like, how did you get into food writing? And that story is like less interesting. But I would say that I only just recently, maybe the last couple of years, realized how Korean my upbringing was because growing up in the South, I was surrounded by white people, and my schools were all predominantly white. But as I really thought back on it, as I was writing this cookbook, I realized what a Korean experience it was and what a huge Korea town I was living in. So we had an H Mart, maybe two H Marts, like within 10 minutes of each other. We had all these Korean businesses kind of taking over the shopping malls. And I remember just when I was younger, I used to hate that because those were some like businesses I liked, like Blockbuster went away. And then this Italian restaurant where I went on like a first date that turned into a Korean fried chicken place. But actually now that's my favorite Korean fried chicken in Atlanta. It's called Joy Chicken. Everyone always asks. It's Joy Chicken and Pizza in Atlanta. It's very good. But yeah, I think I had a very lucky upbringing. I was surrounded by Korean people. We went to a Catholic church, which was a Korean Catholic church. I went to Korean school every Saturday. It was a very Korean upbringing, basically. And I think that maybe made a huge difference in who I became and my confidence later. And then I moved to New York as soon as I could.
But you ate Korean food all the time.
Yeah, every day my mom cooked Korean food. But also, I've always said this, but it holds true today as it did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The Korean food in Atlanta is kind of better than the Korean food in Manhattan. And I can't say the same for Flushing and Jersey and other places, but it's really good Korean food. And I think that happens because it's Korean food made for Korean people versus Korean food made for a wider audience. So I've always cherished that. Yeah.
But you did come to New York as a student, and actually you majored in English as an undergrad.
Yeah.
And then you actually you decided to pursue doctorate degrees in American literature. We're at the Korea Society. It matters a lot where you went to school. But why English? Why did you decide to study English and then decide to pursue a doctorate degree?
Yeah. So I always remembered since 10th grade I wanted to be an English professor. I don't know why. Because I think because in school, the English courses were always the ones that were the easiest for me, and I would get like over 100 in them and be like, and then after a while I realized, oh, I should just like do this because I'm good at it. And so I always told myself that I would be an English professor. And so when I got to college, um, I loved. I actually went to college in New York to become a pop star. I tried to be a pop star. I tried to. I was joking about it before, but I had a guitar. I was trying to be like the next Michelle Branch. I chose New York versus Nashville, the other option, because I wanted to be a songwriter in like the New York circuit. And so I was playing these rock clubs, and no one was coming. And anyway, after a while, I just started to really fall into school and really fall in love with it. And I loved my courses and I loved reading, these novels, especially from the 20th century. That was sort of like my focus. So once I finished college, I was just like, I think I definitely want to keep doing this. So I went to the PhD program, and halfway through, I was like, oh, I was so miserable. I was so depressed. I think with academia, it's really hard to find meaning and purpose because so much of it is like elusive, and there really isn't like an end goal sometimes, and there's so few jobs in academia, so a lot of that played a part. And I got to a point where I like to tell this story because it's like the biggest failure of my life, I think, and I think it led to like everything else. But it was an oral exam, and I really I sucked at it. I like totally flunked. One of the professors like laughed at me. It was because I was
Oh,
really
that's
it
mean.
was really bad, but the PTSD sort of makes me like try to like tamp it down. But I think it was great for me in the end because that moment made me realize how much I uh, wasn't ready for that job, or I didn't want that job because of I love the books, I love the teaching, I love a lot of aspects about it, but I didn't love the whole thing, which was a lot of performing and a lot of talking, and which is ironic because now I'm asked to talk a lot at stuff like this. But yeah, I was terrified of public speaking, and so I really flunked that exam. They gave me a low pass and asked me to either take it again to continue with the doctorate, actually writing the dissertation, or I could take the degree, take the low pass and take a degree. So I decided to take a degree, and it turned out that all these people also did that year. Like 3 or 4 other classmates had done that, and then by the end, more people had dropped out, and then it was like in headlines that people in my class specifically like didn't get jobs at the end of their 6 year, 7 year like PhDs. So it was a really weird full circle moment because by then I was at my second or third food media job, and trying to figure out which parts of the story are interesting. It's always hard to do when you're talking about
Well,
your
first
own
of
life.
all, so what was your dissertation was going to be?
Oh my God, it was probably like about it was definitely 20th century American fiction
Mm.
and some concept of like temporality, like time and ethnicity,
Mm.
which is so which is so like doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like high theory
Yeah.
crap, and so I think eventually I got into, well, my first job after that was at Food Network because I was suddenly this thing that I wanted since 10th grade was gone. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was the most depressed I'd ever been, and just trying to find my next step. And so I was applying to like public school teaching jobs, um, in private school. I don't know why I said that. Just teaching jobs for like high school teaching. And then I had lunch with my one of my old bosses at Food Network. I had interned there in college, and she was like, "I don't know if you want this, but I have the job for you." And it was an entry level position where you sort of like input recipe, data. It's basically to get from the editor to the site. And so I was just like the data entry guy, and it was bottom of the rung. I felt like too old by then to be doing a job like that. But then that's how I learned how to write a recipe. I learned how to write recipes, and
Oh.
then everything kind of changed from there. I got promoted a couple times. Really enjoyed Food Network, and then took a job at Food 52, and then somehow ended up here. And it's all really random. And when I tell that story, I think people don't realize how short that time period actually is. I've only really been doing this for a couple of years. Yeah.
So then it sort of came to you. It's not that you decided that you'll become a food writer
Yeah.
or anything like that, but were you always interested in food writing?
Um, I
You
liked
said
that.
you interned at Food
Yeah,
Network.
Internet Food Network. I was an editorial intern, but at the time I didn't even know that food writing was a job, so I didn't know that it existed yet. It was the job that I took after grad school, where I started reading more of my colleagues in the industry, and I was like, oh, this is really rigorous reporting or rigorous writing, and here's a forum where you can talk about culture and history, and you can do all these interesting twists and turns to get at like cultural criticism, and that was so interesting to me. And at the end, there's a recipe, so you can feed people. So there's like a point to it. It's not like a dissertation about time and ethnicity. So I think that really attracted me, and I like that you said it kind of came to me because I do feel like it came to me. It was just such a random. Yeah, I think about the last few years, and they feel really random. And I don't think anyone like gets out of bed and says that they want to be a food writer. That's so random. But I think it's really cool because we have like Gia here, she's over there doing the program, and she studied. She was a food studies major at NYU, and so now it's like a thing, which is I think is really cool, and I think it's something you can like work towards. And there are practical ways to become a food writer,
Mm,
but there are also many ways to food write. So.
mm,
I think that's cool.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you started doing food writing, I do want to ask you because I promised you that this will not be, Jay and Eric talking about Nigella Lawson hour. But we do have to talk about Nigella Lawson because we just talked about how much we absolutely love her and adore her. But I also think that that particular type of writing that she does probably influenced you. So can you tell me little bit about when you decided that this could be a job for you and you decide to go for it, what kind of food writer you wanted to become and what kind of influences that you had at the
Yeah,
beginning?
now that you actually mention her, she was a really big part of it. So in grad school, that's really when I was cooking the most and learning how to cook. And I was cooking from her cookbooks and from her TV show, which was, bootlegged on YouTube at the time. I think it's still some episodes are, but I would just binge watch her while um, doing my grading essays or whatever. And I just liked the way she talked about food. I thought it was so luxurious, and I mean, she's British, so she has that accent. And then it was really when I bought more of her cookbooks, and it was the book Feast. Feast. It's food that celebrates life,
Right.
which is funny because my book is called Food That Make or what is it called? Food That
Food
Tastes
that
Like Home.
tastes like home.
And so I think I was really influenced by her, and in that book, Feasts, she really dives into multiple cultures that aren't her own. And I thought that was fascinating because you can't tell that they're not her own. I mean, because she's like a Jewish, like British lady writing about Eid or something. But the way she did it was in such a like humble, reported, academic way, and it was so rigorous. And I learned, I always call it feigned humility, but it's really important on the page, I think, to get people to like trust you. It's like, but you don't want to seem like so you're sort of just being like, oh, So the way she wrote about other cultures, it was always like, it might not seem traditional to this and this dish, but actually in 1700 BC in this text, there's a book, and so she like does, that whole book is like that, and it's a lot of just her flexing her um, her reading skills really. I think it all comes down to reading. It's like you can tell when someone's read a lot, and Nigella is someone who read a lot, and her cookbook showed that. And her headnotes were like a whole page long. I feel like publishers would not be okay with that now, but I borrowed a lot from that, and those books would make me just like, oh yeah, getting emotional thinking about it. They would just make me cry in the train because they're so even she would talk about I can't go on too far. I go forever, but she wrote about the human experience in such a raw way. And when she was writing that book is I think when her husband was dying of cancer. So it's like there are those life moments threaded throughout, and her kids are like really young. And I just thought that was what a great nexus point for like all these different experiences as a human, and interests and joy, but also sadness. And so I was like, damn, this is food writing. That's so cool. So that's how I think she really influenced me for sure. And then when I met her, I just like started bawling. It was awful. Yeah. That's really hard to
And
meet
was
her.
she nice to you?
Oh, she's very
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, she's very kind.
Good.
She's a kind person.
Good.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I think what you just said is kind of interesting because when we think of food writing, we think of recipe writing.
Yeah.
But then there's also this whole aspect of food culture and history. And I do think that the best type of food writing combines the two.
Yeah.
So how did you said that your entry level job basically taught you how to write recipes. What does it really go into writing recipes other than I know you guys test it over and over again, but is there a specific technique that you have to learn as a writer to make the recipes sound doable to, non-food writers and non-food professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this every day because now my job is everyday cooking and working on recipes. And people always ask like how I arrive at my recipes, and it's just so random. Everything's random in life, I think. And I think with recipes especially, it just depends on the dish. But um, I always say that I don't know. I wish I had taken a technical writing class. I had a colleague tell me that that's something that people should do, and I thought that was really wise because it's this technical writing that a lot of my I think people know me for the head notes and like the reports I do or the essays, but there's if you like read someone who cares about the recipe, if you read their directions, I don't know if mine are always like this, but like some people are really good at that, and I love when the directions are practical and technically accurate, but also they have some like voice and they kind of like guide you. And Nigella is someone who does that really well. Gabrielle Hamilton does that really well, the chef of Prune. But I think recipe writing is just as diverse as food writing. There are many kinds, and it's like finding the kind that you like. And the kind that I like is the one that's like speaking at you. And I try to do that when I can or when I remember to. But it's so nice when you have a recipe that's guiding you through the directions, but also telling you like it's gonna look like this, but don't worry, it's gonna look like this in 10 minutes, or like because that's what people do that's what you do when you're cooking, right? You're sort of um, you need like information as you're going, but you need it quickly, and so that's why I love the recipe form as a form for like knowledge exchange. And there's not a lot of room, especially if you're working at a daily paper, because it's on the page literally. But I think yeah, recipe writing, there are many ways to do it. There are bad ways to do it, and there are good ways. And I think it's about just discerning what you like. And I feel like that's something that I've been able to do with the guidance of all these amazing people above me. Like my boss is Genevieve Ko, who's been in the industry for decades, and she's just so talented. And hopefully she's not listening because this seems like I'm sucking up. But she's really um, she's really good at helping me find the succinctness, but also helping me preserve the voice, because I think that's what makes a recipe like worth following, because it's that person's representation of that experience. Yeah,
So
anyway.
you've also written for different media or different publications.
Yeah.
So when you write for these different publications, do you try to sort of think about who's reading that publication and trying to fit your style into that audience? Or do you try to think about just your style and try to, especially when you first started, um, like, did you think about what kind of food writer I want to be and try to sort of put that style? So which came, I guess, which came first?
Wow, that's a great question. I feel like it would sound really insufferable if I was like, yeah, I was thinking about what kind of food writer I wanted to be. But I do think there was a little bit of that because my job at 52 was a lot of just experimenting and doing it for the first time and being like, I don't know what I'm doing. I had like food blog before then, but not like had hundreds of people making the dish, and now it's like thousands. So it's like, so I think it's my writing's changed in that at 52 it was like a playground. I was like sort of, you know, just doing things that I thought tasted good. But at the times, I think there's a little bit more deliberation on my part to provide service. I think that's really important to me. I just love when people make the dishes and it comes out perfectly for them, and then they say, "Oh, I made it like twice this week, and I'm gonna keep making it." And that's what you want. You want people to learn something and to feel empowered. And So I think it's very much about service journalism for me. But you know, while doing that, of course, I'm sort of like I have this anxiety of influence. I don't know if like that's even the right usage of it, but and I don't want to like go too far into that, but uh, I have this anxiety of like not of not producing something original or putting something out that doesn't need to exist. Like I feel this way about Korean food. Whenever I'm developing a Korean recipe, I'm like, did Mangchi already do this, you know, perfectly? Like, did Sangyeong Langus already do it perfectly? Like, I don't need to put out a perfect, like, bulgogi recipe. So, the one in my book, for instance, actually, it's that picture.
Yeah.
It's a lemon pepper, it's a crispy lemon pepper bulgogi with, sorry, with quick pickled shallots and, like, cilantro and jalapenos. It's just so a representation of Atlanta, the Atlanta Korean experience for me, and not, you know, and I do make regular bulgogi, but it's sort of like I don't need to be the one who puts my name on that recipe because I'm there. It already exists. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so I want to come back to that recipe writing too, but I also wanted to ask you because you've mentioned a lot of people right now, like Mangchi, Nigella, Gabriel Hamilton. But I was wondering when you first decided that this is going to be your career, whatever that moment was there anybody that you could look up to? I mean, we talk a lot about representation and did you feel like, is this something I could do because I'm a good writer? Or was there somebody you could look up and say, hey, that person did that, like, so I can sort of follow that footstep? Did you feel like there was some sort of steps that you could follow? Or did you feel like you just had to do it on your own?
Um, yeah, I think there are certain steps, and you want to be like, oh, it's all random, but actually, I learned a lot from Priya Krishna. She's my colleague now, but I saw the way she like came out of nowhere and just like started writing for the Times, and then she wrote that amazing cookbook, Indianish, and I saw the way she like used Instagram to do it and to promote the book, and so there are those little details that I was like studying and paying attention for years before I decided like, okay, I think I'm gonna come out now and like do the thing. And and in many ways I feel like I only just started like a couple of years ago. I feel like I said that already. But it took watching my peers for sure. Mayuk Sen is I feel like we never talk about each other, but we are like good friends and like he was doing the food writing at Food 52 that I didn't know existed at the time. So I was at Food Network at my desk in my cubicle, just like reading his articles and being like, "Damn, this is good." And then, and then so actually, like I applied for his job when he left, and then I think I got like an interview, but they were like, "We think you should be better as like a senior editor." So like I became the editor, but like I thought it was there's like kind of this genealogy I think with like young people who have discovered like food writing as a medium for so much more, and especially with the internet. And I think a lot has changed. And I think ultimately, those are people I looked at, and I was like, I want I like those careers. Like those are the kinds of careers I would want, like one that's built on quality and not quantity. And so I think over the years there were opportunities that I I like could have taken, but I didn't because I think I always joke about this, and I worry about people who have listened to other interviews where I basically say the same thing over and over. But this is my life, though. But Timothy Chalamet did a GQ profile, and it was a really good one. And it sounds like I'm joking, but it was a really good profile. And the guy like the reporter like followed him for days and went into the woods with him, and where he's preparing for his Bob Dylan film. But little Timothy Chalamet said like some really wise things in that, and it was sort of about like um, that realization that you're being watched and like that people are noticing, and so it's like, oh my God, am I the vision that I want people to like see? So I think that's when he like sort of it's not that interesting, but he like got off social media and like started focusing on the art and stuff like that. But I think what I borrowed from that though was okay, I'm gonna focus on just like putting out good work, put my head down, and sort of stay out of the fray, and hopefully people will notice. And I think that's worked so far. Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, the food media these days, it's very different and it has changed a lot and it seems to be evolving. And being a food writer does not mean that you just write recipes.
Yeah, that's true.
So, for example, for your New York Times, you're constantly doing these videos where you do cooking demonstrations and but also telling stories. Um, is this what you thought you'll be doing? And so then just writing, recipes or writing stories is one thing. Now and you said you had a fear of public speaking. Now you have to do this, things like this. You have to be in front of camera. You have to deal with social media. I mean, your Instagram, it has it's a huge presence. And all these things are part of your career. So how do you prepare yourself to do all these things?
Yeah, I don't prepare, I think. I think I like don't. It's also new for me, and I did a bunch of PR last week for Thanksgiving, and it was just so crazy, and you know, my first time on TV and like stuff like that. So it's all very new, but um, I think ultimately I'm really lucky. And maybe this is like a weird thing to say, but I feel like in many ways, I feel like my career started like in the pandemic, and that's when I went freelance and was really like writing for other publications and making a name for myself or trying to. And I think I was really lucky to do that, and I started the Times job in quarantine still, And I think that was really important because I was doing the work and not really noticing anything from the outside, and that helped keep me sane because I think it would drive anyone a little crazy, and it's all really scary, just being perceived all the time. Not all the time, but anyway, basically I'm a hermit, so I think it's like it's really it really helps me to have a job where I get to do most of my thinking on a screen, um, and at the end of the day, the video stuff is like so fun, and it's an extent. I see it as an extension of my reporting and my work, rather than like a big part of it. It's like it's really it always starts with the piece, with the article, the essay, or the recipe, whatever it is. And I think getting to focus on the thing that's on the page has always kept me grounded and kept me um, really happy and fulfilled. And so the other stuff is like it's nice. It's like it's lovely to see all of you, and I can't wait to meet some of you. But I do love I love my job because I just get to stay inside.
But also, you are writing for the New York Times, and you've written for many other, well-known publications. So when you started, did you ever feel like you were expected to write certain things because of who you are and because of your last name and the fact that you're a Korean American? Um, did you always sort of envision yourself writing Korean food recipes, or did you feel like you have to put? But most importantly, like more importantly, at least to me, did you ever feel like you had to write Korean recipes, Korean food recipes, like or that you were being sort of pigeonholed into that, that dreadful word, the quote unquote ethnic food category?
Yeah,
Um, and if you were, how did you try to get out of that?
it's a great question. I definitely worried about it with my book because when I was at 52, that's when agents and editors were sort of scouting me, and I was having meetings, and the agent I liked the most was the one I ended up going with, and she and I talked about what the first book would be, and I had all these ideas that I really want to do someday, but I just couldn't see myself starting this career without starting at the beginning, which is the Korean food, and so I really felt like I had to do that first. Not like get it out of the way, but it was kind of like it is, I think that's my origin story, like the Korean food. So I wanted to write about it. I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to write down my mom's recipes. There are all these personal reasons for doing it, but also professional. But as I started doing it, like my first couple of pieces at the Times were Korean pieces, but um, they I never felt pressured because any Korean piece I've written for the Times, I pitched, and it was never an assignment given to me by someone else. So, and actually, the editors there are are always encouraging me. They're always. I think there is that kind of person, that kind of editor who like wants you to do the Korean thing or wants you to, and you can tell them by a mile away. But the editors at the times, they're very much like always encouraging me. They're like, hey, just I want you to know that like you don't have like we want you to write about everything. And I think um, that was really important to hear, you know, because then you know that you're not being tokenized or like something like that. Um, but then writing about Korean food is really fun for me. It's really interesting to me. And as an academic and as someone who grew up with the culture, it's like I'm intellectually interested in this, but also I feel like a real connection to it, and I feel like I can tell the story well, or I can tell it in with like insider things that maybe someone from the outside won't be able to. And there's a little bit of that. Like I feel very much it's a big like responsibility that I take seriously anytime I write a Korean piece, and um, lots of pros and cons with that. Some Koreans aren't like happy with everything, but at least I get to like tell my version of that story, and with the reporting and with the professional expertise that I do have, which is reading books and finding details in the past and kind of shoring them into the present for people. And yeah, and I also learn a lot myself. It's fun to you grew up with this thing, whatever the dish is, and then you realize, wow, it's touched like all these parts of the world and all these parts of time, and I think that's very cool, and that's something that I like to bring in. Yeah,
And you got to spend time with your mom when you
yeah,
were writing this book.
yeah.
You wrote really beautifully in that New York Times article about what it was
Oh yeah,
like to
thanks.
spend.
Yeah.
And we are all very much looking forward to reading more about it. But what was it really like for you to go back? I mean, you're not the only young person who had to go back home during the
Yeah,
pandemic.
yeah.
So, it's that time period too, but also you're writing about her recipes, but also I'm sure you have your own way of thinking about food. And so what was that process like?
Um, this is a great practice for when my book comes out next year. I always worry about like crying because anytime you talk about your mom, it's like
Yeah.
it's like unexpectedly. Anyway, it was really it was life changing. It sounds like very sentimental, but um, how do I want to talk about it? In that article, it's called A Year of Cooking with My Mother. It was like a Mother's Day piece for the Times, and it also happened to be exactly when I was like leaving home after 9 months of cooking with her. So I was feeling a lot of things, and I was like, how do I distill this? It's like coming already. How do I distill this like experience that changed my family's life? It's like if you're, I'm really grateful for the book deal because it gave me the prompt to do this, which was write down my family recipes, write down my family's recipes specifically, but also to understand our past and like to try to piece together aspects of it that now make more sense in the present. Or like, remember when we did that and we ate that? Like, why did we do that? And it's like, oh, it's because in 1980, blah, 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 blah. And it's just weird. It's cool to do that when you take your personal history and tie it to like a context, and it just makes the world make sense. So that's kind of what happened. No big deal. But I think with the cookbook, that piece starts with something about yeah, it starts and ends with my mom's kitchen, which is I ruined with all my cooking and all my things, and I bought her like so many pots and pans she probably like never uses anymore. But I wanted to tell that story because, and the book tells that story. The book starts with a fight between my mother and me, and I wanted to tell those stories because it's not like this like it's not. I hate that stereotype of the adorable immigrant mother who like tiptoes around and like brings you fruit and is always nice and all. But like my mom's fiery. She's like super feisty, and we fought a lot in the beginning because it's weird. It's like your son coming in telling you how to cook these things that it's like or I didn't tell her how to do things. I was just like, why wouldn't you just do it like this? And she'd be like, because this is the way I do it. Or she'll really most of the time, honestly, it was like, I don't know actually. So I think it was weird for her to have like someone kind of questioning why she's like doing certain things, and I wasn't doing it to like doubt her. It was more like I need to know why, like technically, because I'm writing the recipe. But yeah, ultimately there's a lot of knowledge exchange, right? And it's funny because there's a recipe in that piece. It's my mom's kimchi jjigae, and hers is really special because she uses in her kimchi she puts pine nuts in it. I think a lot of people do that, but it's really special when it ends up in your kimchi jjigae and it ends up on your spoon, and it's like such a surprise. You like forget about it, and I love that. She also uses fish sauce and meshuchang in it. I think that might be like some kind of weird to even Koreans, but there's no gochujang. It's very like clean. It's like it's so good. And like she the body comes from ribs, like baby back ribs, which get blanched in ginger. And in this pot, I forgot to take the ginger out. There's a step where you like drain the meat and then you put it back, and it tasted even better because it was like really gingery, and I was like, oh my god. If you think about it, like kimchi is like ginger and garlic and fish sauce, and so you're just fortifying all those ingredients, and it's this really bright red, clean tasting kimchi jjigae, and I just love it so much. And anyway, that's what I learned from her, and then that's the piece where the sheetpan bibimbap came out, and so that's something I taught her. I feel like I didn't teach her much. I just taught her how to like use the oven, but so the main difference between our cooking is like I use the oven because I'm lazy and she uses the stove. But
If you
yeah,
taught her how to use dishwasher, then I would be really impressed.
no, that's a drying rack,
Yes.
so obvious. Yeah.
Why is it like what is it with the Korean moms? They never ever use dishwasher. But anyway, I digress.
Twisted.
Um, um,
Smart. Yeah.
but yeah, but was there anything that she just went like when she was I'm sure it must have been a very mixed feeling for her too, to just observe you, and also like for her to separate that this is my son versus this is his job and he's trying to do something professional. So was there a recipe that she just went like, oh, okay, like now that's legit. Like I learned something from you other than the sheep and bibimbap.
Yeah. Let me think. Mm, oh my God, I feel like after writing that book, I like blacked out. It was just so such an intense experience. Uh, maybe in the stews. The stews were very her. The stews or the jigas are the ones that the tangs and those are all super Korean, and I do have my little flourishes, but the base recipes were hers mostly. And there's a tenjan jiga that she called tebak. She was like, "This is perfect." And it was a really weird It's a really weird tenjan jiga. It's like I call it a tenjan jiga with silken tofu and raw zucchini, I think, because it's more of like a kangdenjang. Do you guys know what that is? It's
Right.
like the thicker thing. It's something that my mom made with the leftovers of the tenjanjiga when all the liquid would be gone, and she would fortify it with like meat, and so it'd be this like condiment that you spoon over your rice. It's so delicious. And so I wanted to make a jiga that was more like that. And so mine has sundubu in it actually, and it's like it has the enoki mushrooms, which tastes like noodles, and then I hate cooked zucchini, so it's raw zucchini that gets tossed in at the end, and it's this very like I don't know. That's something that she was like, "Oh wow, you taught me something different,"
Right.
and so that was something that she liked. But so a lot of it, I make it sound like she didn't like the food, but like she had to like approve of everything, right? It's like she was my main tester, so she'd be like, if it didn't have kamchilmat, if it didn't have that like savoriness, if it
Right.
didn't like bite, grab you, it was like not good enough to be in the book. So we both had to kind of agree. And then adjusting our salt levels was weird because Korean moms like hate salt and I love it. So yeah, it was a lot of that. So when she was saying it was bland, I knew it was bland.
Ah,
So yeah,
okay.
it's useful. Yeah.
I think we can talk about your mom forever, but
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about because you mentioned your editor, Genevieve Ko, um, and you've also worked as a senior editor
I have,
behind helping other writers. So, what's the role of editor for you as a food writer, and what kind of help do you need from them? And if when you're working as an editor, what do you try to offer the writers?
I always joke that I like blackout. I probably shouldn't say that so often, but I feel like I've blacked out that senior editor job. It was like a really hard job, and anyway,
Yeah.
we'll talk about it another time. But I think ultimately, I'm going to answer this as a writer. I think I'm not. I don't think I should be an editor again. But ultimately, as a writer, I think what I need, and it is something that I tried to give as an editor, but um, I think number one that's really important is to like help your writer preserve their voice. There are ways to help them find the narrative string, and whether it's a recipe or a story, my editors are there's so many editors at the times like working on one thing. The recipes get edited again by a second editor and a third editor, and then the stories get edited by like three different people, and it's just like a system to like make sure there's like quality at the end. And the thing that I really value is someone who's able to help me find like um, the narrative, and because as a writer, you're kind of like putting all the information onto the page, and sometimes it can feel like a vomit of words, and it's the editor's job to sort of help you take that and turn it into like a pretty like thing, and that is like so important, and I think it's such a big part of the writing process too, because like then I take that edit or that feedback and I rework things, and so I don't know if people realize that even though it's the writer who's like front facing on the page and as the byline, it's like a huge collaboration between editor and writer, and so I think that's the best part of my job, and I think that's the best type of writer editor experience when you really trust the editor and you can like you're like you let them do their job, and you trust them, and then they trust you, and there's trust is really important, I think, and that's something that's not really easily um, not so easily earned. It's like especially as a freelancer, there's so much just like one-off kind of handoffs that happen. But yeah, sometimes I have people coming to me who are like, "Oh my God, I hate my job," or blah blah blah, but I love my editor, or whatever, vice versa. And I'm always saying like, man, I think if you're a writer, if you're like really a writer at heart, you never let go of that editor relationship. And I still have editors I keep in touch with because I really appreciate them, and it's so hard to find that like connection. It's like finding a therapist, which is impossible, or
Makes
a
sense.
boyfriend or whatever. Yeah.
So we're gonna open up to your questions, but I have one thing I want to ask you because I just read this article just a couple days ago from the New York Times, not written by you but by your colleague, about the recipe copyright issues, which we all know that it's probably going to be very, very difficult to copyright, even if it's your mother's 된장찌개. Then probably 3 million other moms will want to copyright their recipe. But I think it was an interesting article because it's not just whether you can copyright recipe or not, but it's also ties into that whole question of authenticity and representation, cultural appropriation, all these big words that's really huge right now in the food media industry. And I think at the end of the day, it's a question of who gets to tell people how to cook something, and therefore who gets to tell the story. So I know this is like a huge topic, but you said that you never felt like you were asked to write solely about Korean food, but you wanted to. So, what's your thought on this whole idea of cultural appropriation and the question of authenticity?
Yeah, well, big question.
Uh,
Um, and something I think about every day. And it's a really good piece, by the way. Priya Krishna wrote it this week in the Times. So good. But basically, you know, I think this conversation of cultural appropriation has done this whiplash. I call it like a whiplash. It's like there was a moment where everyone was like, you can't cook that food unless you're part of the culture. And then people start to realize that was like this extreme reaction. But then people start to realize like there's a way to do it well. And I describe Nigella Lawson's writings as like someone who did that well way back before it was fashionable. But I think it all comes down to reporting. And in that same issue, the Times issue this week, it's like in my backpack. I was actually just like reading that article. Um, it's all about giving credit where credit's due, and I think that's really important and something that for some reason people don't know how to do or are afraid to do. It's like not that hard to explain that this was inspired by this or it came from this, or here's the original and this is this. I just read a recipe recently from a colleague. It was published years ago, but it was based off of a French dish, and the head note it's like the French dish is this originally this, this, and this, but I replaced it with this, this, and this because this, and this, and this. And it was a really like, you know, windy thing, but that's how you're supposed to do it. Like you're supposed to give credit to everyone and every influence. And also that's really interesting. It's really interesting to see where recipes end up and where they come from. And but I think it's always, important to ask the question who is profiting off of the recipe too. And I think if you're writing a recipe from a genuine place and it's something that really interests you, then it's authentic to you. I hate the word authenticity. It's something that I really battled when I was first writing about Korean food in a very public way, which was at the times those two pieces actually. So think of kimchi as a verb. That was a piece
Right.
that came out, and there were some Koreans who were not happy with it. They were like, "Those are muchims," and it's true they are muchims, but like I was trying to tell the story of like how my mom ultimately like um, would makeshift kimchi at night. She'd be like, "We don't have any like kimchi," or we're in like Maine or something, and she's like, "We need whatever." So, and actually, she would like have these like muchim dressing. Like she would have the dressing in a little plastic pouch like that was frozen before, and then she would bring it on the flight and mix that with the TSA's listening. I didn't say that, but yeah, she'd be like mixing it with whatever the produce was there, and so we had a lot of muchims growing up, and that was sort of our kimchi element on the table, um, and then and that's when I really learned. I was like, wow, um, you have to credit everything. You have to like really make sure you're telling the story in a way that doesn't make it sound like you invented it. Yeah, because like in the end, no one really invents anything. It's like it's all, I don't want to say derivative because that's pejorative, but everyone has an influence, and the story about the influence is what's really interesting, I think.
Mm.
And yeah,
And how
that's nice.
we all evolve, right?
Yeah,
From that. So
things evolve.
So I can go on and on and on, but I promise that you guys can also ask questions. So if you raise your hand, we're gonna have a mic for you. Well, there are a lot of hands, so bring on the mic. Lots of hands going up.
Oh,
Yep.
hi. Thank you. Hi. So first of all, so good to meet you. So I have a question, and you kind of talked a little bit about it, but I would just like love if you could expand on it. So I also grew up in the South. I grew up in Dallas, so very, very predominantly white as well. So I actually just moved to the city, and I hate introducing Korean food to my non-Korean friends. It's just something that like I personally struggle with. Like I don't want to be the person to explain to you like how to eat it or like what this means to me. And so as someone who has like such a platform and like obviously you're sharing these like incredible recipes and I'm so happy for the representation and like for you to share these like intimate things. I was just wondering like do you ever have those moments where you're like I don't want to share this? And if you do, like how do you overcome that fear?
Wow, that's a great question. Hmm. I think I guess I don't. I might not have that fear, or yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think for me, I know what you mean though. I totally know what you mean. It's like bring a bunch of white friends to Korean barbecue, and you're like, you have to teach, you have to tell them how to eat it. But I think, and then one time, sorry, this is a really weird way to answer the question, but I had a moment with my ex like years ago when we had been dating for like 5 years, and we were having Korean barbecue, I think actually. And he was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Gochujang." I was like, "Wait, we've been dating for 5 years and you don't know what gochujang is?" And it felt like a slight to me. So maybe my standards are too high, but yeah. Anyway, if there is a friend who doesn't know what something is, from kimchi to like kopchang or whatever, I'm sort of like, um, I don't know. I love teaching people. I think I'm a teacher at heart, so I love teaching people. Um, Not just like how to eat it or what it is, but how to incorporate it into their own lives. And so I think that's I think of it as like culinary diplomacy. I don't know if that sounds like unsexy, but I really love this notion, especially on a platform like the Times, where I can put out a recipe that happens to feature a Korean pantry item, and that forces people to like learn about it. And it's not like I'm didactically like telling them like this. Yeah, it's more like they get to taste it themselves and then learn, on their own. And I was just like the gateway drug or something to get them hooked. So I think of myself that way. Thanks for the question.
So right there and then front.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I really actually personally love more of your stories and like your essays and stuff like that. But my question is more like Korean society is very patriarchal. Moms don't really love their sons like in the kitchen or cooking. It's like always been kind of considered women's work. Even in like American society, it's like professional cooks are men, but home cooks are women. And so as a Korean man, how has gender kind of played in your relationship to food and how your parents' expectations of what you would be doing may have not included food or food writing or cooking, and like how they kind of accepted your journey to now? Because I mean, I love to cook, but like as a non-binary person, my mom's always like, you need to be like a good Korean woman. I'm like, that's we're gonna stop right there.
Yeah, I feel like as children we're always like gonna rebel the most we can. So, but not that I had to rebel much, but um, you know, I love to bake. That was the first thing, and I do remember like a cousin who was like, "Are you gay?" I was like, "Actually, I am," and but that has nothing to do with this. And I think, but I was really lucky. My parents, they were they were like they were not very like Korean in many ways. They are very Korean in many ways, but like in ways of like gender expectations and stuff like that. I think they were just excited to get to eat like this food that this weird food that I was making since I was little, which was like more of the American stuff, right? Because my mom was the one cooking the Korean food. So yeah, it's interesting. Oh, but she always says, growing up, she always said this. She was like, or what did she say? She says something like, "Oh, if only you were," or she was like, "I don't need a daughter because I have you." And it's definitely a comment on like my cooking because it's like, you know.
Right.
So yeah, maybe that's the only way it really influenced me. But I was always very encouraged, I think. But yeah, I think children should rebel. Great to meet you.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for sharing your personal information and actually good stories.
Thanks.
I have a question that is more like professional advice. So I'm from Kimchi Market. We're an online grocery company,
Cool.
and we deal with the fine natural Korean food, but we also write, and we also produce a lot of video content and recipes. Now we have to work on our content more, and we need to work with some uh, more writers.
Mm.
And reflecting your experience at Food 52 and other media companies, my question to you is, when you work with many different writers, how does the organization keep their voice? Because tone and manner is important for branding. If they do encourage for the writers to speak and write in their own style, then what do they do in order to keep that some sort of consistency?
Wow, that's a great question from a brand perspective. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I really believe that if you encourage your writers to, be themselves and to bring things that they're passionate about, I always call them obsessions. Like on the food desk at the Times, everyone has these obsessions that they're allowed to pursue every week, and it ends up in like an issue. I think that produces the best journalism. And even among a sea of voices, you do want some like variance, I think. Um, of course, as the editor, you get to like make sure no one's going like off the rails or anything. But man, it's a good question. I really, but I believe, I think I'm saying this as a writer and not like a brand, VP of brand at some company. But I think if you don't, you know, like if you don't like suffocate people's voices, they're gonna just be freer and be more readable, I think. I feel like that's important. I feel like maybe that's not answering your question in the end, but I think ultimately the variety of voices and tones is really nice. But yeah, I don't know. If you're a company trying to do that, it's about hiring writers that fit you, your brand and your voice. So I definitely feel that I'm never gonna pitch like a magazine that doesn't fit my voice, you know. So in that way, as the editor, as the person kind of controlling the tone of a publication, you get to curate the roster of writers. I feel like it's that curating the writers versus curating the writing. So it's yeah. I have some names for you.
Great. He's been very patiently waiting at the very front. Yep, it's coming.
Maybe it's
There
for the
you go.
virtual users.
Yeah.
Hi. Um, so thank you for sharing your story about cooking with your mom. I've been trying to do that with my own mom because I want to be able to make um, like home style Taiwanese food.
Yeah.
But I realized a few weeks ago when I went to visit, not having her food for a long time, that it didn't taste the same as when I was a kid. Did you find that with your own mom cooking with her, like it didn't taste as you remembered? And did you tell her that?
No idea.
Like how did you?
No
How did you
idea what you're
survive that?
talking about. I'm just kidding. I love talking about taste memory in this way. It's like taste memory is funny because you have this memory of what that thing was, but um, in reality, it might not match up because your taste buds change every 7 years, literally, but also just, you change. And I think what's more important is getting the taste to match the memory and not the actual thing. So, yeah, I think there are certain dishes, I'm trying to remember any. My mom's an excellent cook, so I don't know. No, but, and I'm not saying, yeah, but I think I think it's more of like, um, I think that's a beautiful part when the child goes into their own kitchen and sort of like tries to recreate it and make it match up with their memory, which is this platonic ideal, right? I think that's really special, and that it becomes its own dish too. Like the kimchi jjigae in that Mother's Day story has watercress on top, and that's not something my mom did when we were growing up, but it's something that she did later in life. So yeah, things change. I think that's really cool because your cooking will document that change, and that's important too.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Sarah. So nice to meet you.
Hi.
Um,
Yeah.
I moved to the city very recently to go back to school to pursue writing, pursue journalism, and thank you. And I always wanted to be a writer, but writing about my Korean upbringing, the Korean experience, is something that somehow sort of got into without like I didn't expect that to be a big part of my writing. And reading a lot of your pieces, they're very reflective, very personal, very Korean American. And I wonder, you touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if that was a conscious thing for you and if you have any advice for one that feels really vulnerable,
Oh, say that last
one
thing.
that feels very vulnerable.
Um, yeah. I think I relate to you. I didn't expect to be doing this or like writing about this part of my life so much. Um, and to be clear, I have a feeling that like once this book is out and done, I'll be like, just kidding. I think I'll always like it's funny because it's like I think one thing I learned was that you can't escape who you are, and not that you have to write these stories about your childhood, but um, my Korean Americanness like seeps into everything I do, and every piece I write, there's always like one line. It's like a scavenger hunt. You could probably go through my byline and find, in whatever piece it is. Recently, I wrote about hamburgers. It's like a burger plate, and there's a reference to Korean hanbok steak in there because I can't not mention that because it's like it's the same kind of thread, and so I don't know. I think there's a lot of pressure when you're first starting to do that, but ultimately it became this like strength. I saw it as like my little shining badge. I was like, this is how I make my writing mine, and also your Korean experience is always going to be very different from another person's Korean experience, since experience. And so the more people write about being Korean and Korean food and Korean history, the less it will seem so like new. The less it will be, the less the individual will have to like carry that on. I would love for a world in which like there are many pieces about Korean food like every week, and I think we're getting there. But so I think it's great that you want to be a journalist, or that you're a journalist, and that you're doing that, because I think that's so important with representation, and just to avoid that like tokenization that can happen when just there aren't that many people in the room who look like you, you know. So that's really important to me too. Yeah.
And I know some of you would want to continue to talk to Eric, and Eric has graciously accepted our invitation to stay a little bit afterwards. And, you know, it's a food program, so we have some food and drinks ready for all of you. This is what happens when we actually have an in-person event. So for those of you who are watching online, I hope you will actually come to our event space next time and you get to enjoy all these wonderful things. But thank you so much, Eric. It's
for
been
having me.
such
It's
a
so
lovely,
fun.
lovely
Thanks, guys.
time.
Yeah.
I would like to also thank our IT director, Peter, for making the live webcast possible, and of course our staff, Gia, Helen, Weijin, and our new intern, Subin, for helping out for this event, and hope you guys stay and enjoy. So thank you so much for coming.
Come say hi. Thanks.